Science on Surfaces.
Hello there and welcome to Science on Surfaces, Tips, Tricks and Tools. I'm Malin Edvardsson. In this podcast we want to share knowledge and inspiration related to life in science with the ambition to help facilitate work progression and simplify everyday life in the lab. In this episode we will talk about some of the challenges that could be related to an academic career path. So we'll talk about creativity, productivity and maybe a bit on funding. So here with me in this call I have Professor Fredrik Höök, Professor of Nano and Biophysics at the Department of Physics at Chalmers University of Technology. So welcome back, Fredrik.
Thank you very much.
So you were our guest in episode 29. And then we talked about recent research related to biological nanoparticles, virus infections and vaccine development. And we also talked about how surface analytical tools can be used in that line of research. And then we also talked about the concept of successful research. And we touched on so many interesting topics. And at the end of the conversation, I still had lots of questions on my list. And so you kindly agreed to continue this discussion in another episode, and here we are today. So very much looking forward to this. And so I wanted to pick up the conversation, not exactly where we ended, but almost. So you mentioned that you decided to go for a career in science in spite of all the uncertainties that are involved, because you cannot know that you will gain the impact needed to foster a scientific career. So there are lots of uncertainties when you go for such a career path. So I was just curious to know which are those uncertainties that you are referring to here.
So for me personally, one big uncertainty was that I just started a family at the time when I finished my PhD. So we had a 2-month-old daughter, and my wife was not inclined on joining on a postdoc, which is the first natural step, going abroad for 2 to 3 years, then coming back for 2 additional years, being uncertain on where in Sweden, if we were to return to Sweden, we would go. So that was my own biggest uncertainty. I think, would I have taken that step? I think it would have been from the beginning. I had from the beginning been more decisive in this is the career I'm now aiming for. But since we didn't take that step, which was very much a joint decision, I continued closely related to, in a lab closely related to where I did my PhD, with a scientist who was very interested in the QCM system that we developed during our which I participated in the development of during my PhD, and was kind of guiding an early user of the technique, asking questions of relevance for biointerface science. Hans Elving, if you remember him, Malin.
Yes.
He was working with muscle adhesive proteins, and I was guiding students in his lab on how to use the technique for that purpose. And it was in that time we also managed to figure out a way to probe the water content in these films and how that related to the damping of the crystal. So it was also very scientifically exciting. And that discovery, and also the way we managed to employ different techniques, was sufficient. And I think I was very lucky, and it is very hard to be lucky the same way today. as a young scientist as I was, because the competition was different. But there were two factors. One was that it started to become popular with this relation between small startups and science, and Bengt was early in that, and I was a young and early student in that, and then also that this technique was new, and we started to see that it actually provided relatively new information on interfacial processes, which made it complementary to ellipsometry and surface plasmon resonance, which were dominating at the time. And just 2 years or so, maybe 2.5 years after my PhD, I got a grant from the Swedish Research Council. Perhaps 3.5 years. It's very hard to remember exactly when that happened, but it was unusually quick after my PhD, which also gave me an assistant professor position in the same network as where I did my PhD, which is today not seen in the way it was back then. So, but I also, of course, relate or had a relation to Cusens, and it was in the back of my head that working there or in that company would also have been an option. So I tried to keep two doors open because of that uncertainty.
Yeah, so you had a kind of a backup plan, because I remember you also mentioned that you could also go into teaching.
Yeah, and that was why I was not afraid of taking this brave decision on trying to continue in science. But that was mostly because I knew how hard it is to get promotion in science or to build a group in science. I knew that I very much enjoyed teaching, whether at the university or that you take courses in teaching and become a high school teacher, which I still think is a backup plan for me. And I now and then think that ending the career as a high school teacher could be fantastic.
Yeah. So you still need a backup plan. You still feel that you...
No, not maybe for that reason, but I think one should always think that what you do might not be forever, and that there could be reasons to change. And teaching, I think, is very, very important, and it is something I enjoy a lot. And I haven't really given myself the chance to do only that, to invest all the time you really need into teaching to make the teaching really good. I've focused on a few courses, and I've worked over many years to develop them, but they really didn't start as good courses at the beginning. They are shaping up slowly, but it is something I have in mind, because continuing for your entire career running a big group with a lot of grants, that's also quite exhausting. If you have that sole responsibility on your own.
Yeah, I can imagine. So basically, then you had two backup tracks, so to say. Is that what you recommend then? An approach to handle these uncertainties going into an academic career?
No, I don't think that is at all needed. It was not me who said that, but someone said that about a very more successful academic career than mine, that I am not an academic warrior. I'm the worrying kind.
Okay, the worrying kind, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I think I'm the worrying kind. So,
yeah.
And the drawback with being the worrying kind is that you may lose focus. You do a little bit too much of too many things, and nothing really becomes as good as it could have become if you focused on only that. But you need to be quite brave or very curious, like Svante Pääbo, who got the Nobel Prize yesterday.
Yes. Yeah,
he seemed to be the extremely dedicated, of course, very, very bright as well. But you need a self-confidence and I think maybe the most important thing, whatever you do, is to learn where your own limits are, and stretch them in a reasonable manner. And as for me, I stretched them very slowly myself, but I did it by working together with other people that I enjoyed working with. So that they really stretched me, or we stretched each other to take the next step. Also when it comes to creativity.
Yeah, that's I really wanted to talk about creativity, because to me that seems like an important aspect of science, but maybe it's not as important as I think it is. What do you think? Is it important to be creative?
Well, yeah, it depends on how you define creativity. To me, creativity is to identify these invisible connections between different things that aren't really there, but that you see. A little bit like these surprising associations that happens when dreaming, but see them in nature or in the laws that describe the nature and different phenomena. And I'm for sure not creative in that way. So if I go back and look at those things we have done, and I really say we, that were not done before, they rarely involve more than one small step, one addition, or an invention. You say that if you have two phenomena and you combine them, that's obvious for someone skilled in the art. You usually need three.
Do you usually need what, is it?
Three. You need three components that are combined into something inventive. Combining two is usually, it's just a rule of thumb, and there are many exceptions to that. But very often what you do is that you combine two things into the next step. Much more rarely you approach a problem in a truly innovative manner.
So it's not so far-fetched, you mean? It's like one...
It's much more of a gradual, and I think also if we look at, and I have that in a course in entrepreneurship that I give, that the students are asked to review a scientific paper in a topic that they are fairly educated in, and they review it from the perspective of, or they are asked to identify the inventive height that it is described in this paper, and then they make an analysis on whether it has been a patent has been applied for this invention, or whether it would be possible to apply for an invention given prior art. And then they are also asked to analyze the invention from the perspective of what we call pre-adaptations. And then we ask them to identify at least three scientific discoveries or invention that were invented or discovered prior to this paper, and they can go very far back in history, without which this invention would never have been invented, but which were discovered or invented for a completely different purpose. And if you trace technologies and innovations and also science backwards, you see that very, very often what you often see is that many are working at the same time with the same problem. You rarely alone, but also that it happens to happen at the same time at many places around the world, and that is because knowledge is what brings the next step, so to speak. And that knowledge is, thanks to the fact that patent applications are open and the scientific culture is an open culture, is available. So creativity to me was very much down to knowledge, and also that you think about the knowledge you have and take in new knowledge from different fields at the conference. Don't be afraid of jumping into a room, even if the topic is not your topic, just for the sake of curiosity, and then also share it in suitable groups, like, brainstorming. I think I have never had an idea in a coffee room. Everyone says that's where it happens, but in discussions with students after a group meeting, if we invite someone to give a presentation at our group meeting, which we tend to do every second week on Fridays, afterwards we have sometimes had, and we have that now again, an hour discussion where we discuss either with the presenter still being around to discuss our problems, or we continue to ask questions, or we continue to discuss what we do.
So what do they talk about, the invited speakers? Are they...
Their own research, usually.
Okay, so it's research which is related to what you do, or something completely different?
It varies. It's all over. It is related to biophysics in one way or another, I should say, but not necessarily exactly what we discuss. But that moment is usually a very creative moment. And perhaps we bring coffee to that, but it is not the coffee room.
It's not the coffee room.
We tend, in the coffee room, I think it has always been like that. We discuss other things, like life.
I was going to ask you if do you meet people in the coffee room, and maybe that's the problem. But it's not like you talk about other things. That's more of a problem, maybe. No,
I don't think that is a problem. I also think that it is quite good to discuss the movies you watched over a weekend, or the mountains you climbed.
Well, that's also needed. No, but I was thinking, don't you need some sort of component to stretch your thoughts a bit outside, maybe not outside the box, but like outside your normal thinking patterns? Isn't that what's needed to get some new ideas?
And there are certainly people who can do that in their own brain.
Without external...
But I'm certainly of the type who need to share someone's brain to do that, at least if I look back. And very often that's when someone is having an idea, and then my thought starts to focus in on that idea, and then all of a sudden you feel afterwards that at least you contributed to that, and what became an innovation.
Because I'm thinking of research as much as like how do you say, like something you push on your own, like you're very alone in your research, sort of. But you're describing it as a joint effort.
To me,
with colleagues and maybe with the entire field. So you don't really feel alone in your...
I sometimes feel very alone. That's another thing.
But it's not like you have to come up with the ideas. You're on your own.
No, not when not if if you're fortunate enough to have a research group. I think that I would not have become a good lonely scientist.
Can you be lonely? You have to be in a context.
Right? But it depends a little bit on which field. You cannot be completely alone, of course. But I envy, to some extent, sometimes theoreticians that continue doing research while they train new generations of scientists. They generally have smaller groups, and they are very deeply involved in the science. And they only need to follow how the theoretical, they only have to follow. They have to follow the development. This is my view, without being a theoretician, how theories develop and how computers are upgraded and how new codes are written and so forth. While as an experimentalist, you very quickly in academia have to step away from the lab, and very soon the lab is equipped with instruments that you simply cannot handle. There is the barrier to go back into the lab and really be part of the experimental work is very large, and that is a challenge if for some reason your research group shrinks. And then if you have a sufficiently large research group, you can be self-sustained. You can have in our field competence that are interdisciplinary in the sense that they are recruited from different training backgrounds. And you really need that width in order to do good science. But if you reduce the size, you need to focus on a core a core topic, so to speak, and then that won't work, at least not in my world, without having very strong connections to other groups, almost work together with them, with multiple seniors addressing or at least being active in the same field. And that is where I foresee myself in the coming years, that have working in an environment that is, and I think that in many ways could be good. That there are good reasons to shape the academic environment in that way, instead of having one person being responsible for very many people. And maybe one of the most important questions to ask oneself when one enters into an academic career: what type of academic scientist am I? And in which environment is the topic which I'm most interested in best to work in?
Because I'm also thinking about problem solving relating to this, because you always have to solve problems, right? You push the knowledge barriers forward in your research. There will always be some problems. You need to understand what's going on, or come up with some new ideas on how to maybe plan an experiment to find the answer or whatever. And then don't you need creativity in that aspect to come up with new ideas on how to solve problems? Or is it, maybe it's obvious how to address that?
I don't know if creativity is the correct word. One ability that you develop gradually based on experience by having, even if I'm not personally in the lab that much, I see a lot of the result of a lot of experiments, and one thing you develop is intuition and a gut feeling for what should be tested next. So I think that it is problem solving if you have identified the question you try to solve, rather than creativity. But creativity and an intuition where you are not really sure why, or it is not obvious for someone else why the suggestion you propose might be worthwhile doing, that may appear as creativity. But creativity is a very complicated term to define, I think. But to me, or at least I think, creativity are those associations you make without, you can not even afterwards realize the source of the source that led to this connection. But I've had very few such moments. I cannot even right now come up with a single. I remember once I don't know if I should tell this story, but
Please do. I'm sure our listeners would be eager to hear. It's,
if there are young scientists listening, it might be an interesting little story. It was before I got my professor position in Lund, because I remember the desk I had where when I made when I came to the insight afterwards. I was biking to work one morning. You probably were a PhD student in the group at the time. Do you remember Sofia Svedhem?
yes, sure. Yeah.
She just started, and I was biking to work, and I got this brilliant idea that we should, if we make a DNA pattern on a surface and have lipid vesicles that are patterned with DNA, we could sort them based on sequence-specific hybridization.
Mm.
And we discussed that, and she quickly come up with a smart way of attaching DNA to the vesicles with a cholesterol tag, and eventually it worked, and we were writing a paper, and I thought maybe we should file a patent on this because it seems quite smart. And then I was searching the literature to see if anyone else had done something similar, and then I found a paper, I think it was in Angewandte Chemie, that was, and I became disappointed because it was DNA-based sorting of proteins on a DNA array. So they attached the DNA on proteins and then they sorted that on a DNA array. Then I realized the concept. It was already done a few years earlier. So I downloaded that. And then I had a way of downloading it such that I always named them the same way and saved them in a folder. And then it said, I already have that paper on my computer.
Uh-huh.
And then I checked that paper, and then I had downloaded it the evening before I got the idea when I bike to work.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Mm.
And I think
So there was something there.
exactly.
Yeah.
I read it, and then but I really didn't remember the source.
Mm.
And I also think very often in science that ideas pop up. Yeah. You hear something, but you may not be the one being the creative one. Then there are truly creative persons, but I wouldn't classify myself as one of them.
So
I'm rather a reader and a thinker. I think I'm thinking a lot about what I'm doing and so forth. But a reader, I've been reading a lot, and I think that also helps identify this or that.
And helps creating new ideas.
Yeah,
probably. So would you say that so creativity is not important? Some aspect of problem solving or so could be more
curiosity and knowledge. Generate knowledge.
Yeah.
Curiosity, knowledge, and then with that comes what appear as being creativity, I think.
Yeah. So is this the way that you have been working throughout your career, or do you think you have changed your way of working over the years?
I very early started to depend very much on younger scientists and their ideas, and listen carefully on their suggestions, and rather than being the one who in the beginning of a PhD knew exactly what the end result would be, but giving them a seed, providing a seed of a product, and then trying to have discussions together with them, have a creative environment. And I think in periods when I've had a lot of or sufficient time to spend with the group, it has been working quite well. What is a dilemma in an academic career for anyone, I would say, is to have sufficient time with your group members to have that type of environment that becomes creative. because there are many things distracting you. And so it is at all occupations, not only in academia, I think.
Yeah. So what do you have distracting you in general, you would say?
Yeah, that's a good question. What is it that actually distracts you?
Yeah.
So maybe. Yeah, it's hard to know. I think the uncertainty, that you never know what will turn out valuable. So you tend to say yes in a period when you get a lot of requests for conferences, for instance, or participation in grant proposals. The uncertainty is so large regarding whether you will, regarding knowing whether you will be above or below the threshold. That a good advice is to say yes to and that of course consumes a lot of time. So that is one distraction. Having children, raising a family in parallel with a career where your time is measured, so to speak, even if you can when you are on parental leave, if you can cut that away when you apply for this and that grant or position, that is another maybe distraction, but that is much worse for women than for men, I think, and I don't think we really have figured out a way to make that emancipated yet. So I should certainly not complain, but I remember those years as very stressful years.
And then of course you teach and you supervise, or
but supervision is part of the research. That's certainly one distraction, and that is also an important advice for young scientists, is that when you recruit your first PhD students, it is very important. Those first students are very, very important. And not everyone is suited at taking a PhD, even if they are super brilliant. But if you have a PhD student that runs into some kind of problems or figure out that this was not for me, but still wishes to finish the PhD thesis, you may have to invest a lot of time in, and that can hold for postdocs as well. So recruitment is extremely important.
So when you say they are important, you mean that they shouldn't take too much time from you, in that sense, or they are important in what way you mean?
No, it's good to have what we call good PhD student. I don't mean that a bad PhD student is a bad scientist necessarily. You should find students that suit you and the way you do science, right?
Yeah.
I think that is the important message, because if you have an ad out for a PhD, there are at least 10 that are highly qualified from a knowledge perspective. But everyone is individuals, and you need to identify those that likes to work the way you work, where the communication work. And so I think it is more often a personal thing, and also very, very hard to accept that, and also not so easy if you are in a group and you feel I'm not happy as a PhD student in this group to go to another group, because you have already started on a topic and the thesis should be have a common theme, preferably. But I think that the group composition is extremely important.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge.
Yeah, but if that could take a lot of time to to solve those issues, which may also lead to conflicts within a group, and so those are
Distractions.
Distractions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that I've had a lot of that, but it is inevitable, having had almost 20 students, that there has been issues, of course. And you take them very personal as a supervisor. You feel such a tremendous responsibility for those you take on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So another but very related topic is productivity. Because I have a feeling that there is a pressure of productivity. I mean, it feels like it's increasing over time. Looking back, I mean, reading papers, they were like, this seems like researchers published very few papers. They didn't have that many references at the end of their publications. And now, it's like there are so many publications that are just cranked out, and each publication has hundreds of references at the end, or maybe not hundreds, but lots of references. So it seems like there is a publication pressure that is increasing. I don't know if it's just me, or is this the case? Is this something that you're experiencing as well?
It's another difficult question. Right now we are in a phase where we spend more time on each publication and therefore publish less, with the ambition to publish more complete stories. And we also discuss at our department that it isn't the number but the quality that should matter. And then unfortunately we identify quality with high impact, and high impact in the end may be viewed from number of citations, but the short high impact is publishing in a high impact journal. But it is very, very hard to predict whether you succeed with that. The chances increases, of course, the more work you put into each paper, but the more time it takes, the larger is the chance too that someone else have done something rather similar. So it is a little bit of a risk there. And in my experience also, it is a little bit of gambling in whether you succeed in publishing in high impact journals or not. And the chance increases the more papers you generate. So productivity may be in part driven, or the publication of a lot of papers may in part be driven by the fact that increases the chance to produce something that in the end turns out to have very high impact, because it is so hard to predict what impact your science will have, which of the papers that really will be followed by our others cited and where concepts are shared. And it may sometimes also take very long time. So I think this I think productivity is important. And I don't know where I stand there, whether the way we work now with a slightly smaller group spending more time on each paper with the ambition to present. I wouldn't say, I think we always strive to publish high quality papers, but with more information.
Is that like a new strategy for you that you like actively decided on, now let's go for this instead, publish fewer papers?
It is active in the sense that it suits the topic we are working on right now, in that it depends on not only our group, it also depends on other senior scientists contributing biological or biomolecular knowledge and input on biology. They are more complex. We need to make sure that the particles that we produce and measure on are the very same ones that are used in a cellular experiment. So it suits the type of more complex.
Yeah. So you're several groups working together on these.
In many of the studies we perform now, we are multiple groups with the ambition to solve harder problems, or to draw a connection from biophysics all the way to a biological insight. And it's also, and that also means that, and that is a challenge for which I sometimes mention to young scientists in interdisciplinary science. You, as a physicist, you need to impress both on physicists and on biologists.
Yeah.
And
why is that?
no, I don't mean as a person. I mean the paper.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It is reviewed in two different contexts, where you personally need to rely on someone else's competence in one area and vice versa. And that also naturally leads to more discussions. But I think from an educational perspective, the postdocs and students that participate in this project, they may have fewer papers in the thesis, but the knowledge is broader.
Another thing that I was thinking of when you mentioned that you are now going for fewer papers with more information, I'm thinking, is it so that you can actually afford that strategy because you are already successful, so to say?
No, I think unfortunately, no, it is not so. No, I wish that the university, after a certain level, they promised you funding until retirement. That would be something. No, it's not like that. You are compared with everyone, irrespective of. It's the CV is fairly short-lived, and I think I guess that is correct. That's the way it should be.
But it must be easier for you to get a grant than for someone who's just starting out, because you have so much research produced and so many publications and so on, and a good reputation. So,
but right? more and more, the CV tend to be less and less important, and the actual project starts to become more important. This is a trend I've seen. That of course you should have a CV that makes that it doesn't. It is important, of course, that you have a track record that are suitable for, and I don't mean that it is not important, but the actual project, the value of what you propose to do, that is in my interpretation of, or I think it's a personal view, but I think that there is a trend towards a closer eye on the actual project, and that your CV should back. It should be clear from the CV that you have the resources and the competence and the capacity to bring this all the way to high-end publications and breakthroughs in the field. And of course, that probability increases if you have shown that you have managed to bring a method to life, for instance, that leaves your laboratory, if that is the field you're working in, and so forth. So a track record is important, but it is not so automatically, because you have a CV where you have published where you have a lot of publications, you may have some patents, and some of the papers have been recognized, that automatically leads to a grant, irrespective of what you write. I definitely not.
So how can you be strategic in terms of the project that you propose to make sure that it's a successful outcome in getting a grant?
So very hard to answer that question.
At least you must be aware of what areas are getting funded at this point in time? I mean, there are always these hot areas, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but if of course you can be, you should identify the white spots in important fields.
Mm-hmm.
Where are where are the knowledge gaps? And motivate why knowledge in this area would contribute importantly to a specific field. If we take this area of nanoparticle characterization that we are working on now, and this mRNA delivery, which we have all experienced even physically, the efficiency is around a few percent at best, from how calculated from the amount of mRNA that are injected to how many of these mRNAs that are actually producing proteins.
Talking about the COVID vaccine, right?
Yeah, the COVID vaccine. Yeah, that we discussed last time, I think.
Yeah.
And it is obvious that efficiency, it would be good to increase that efficiency. And then asking the question, identifying, so to speak, what is it that we don't understand that makes this efficiency low? And if you have a good suggestion there and can convince the reviewers of your grant that you have the capacity with the methodology you propose to solve that.
Mm. And so is that difficult then, to identify the white spots?
It can be, yeah, I think that is what is difficult.
Mm.
Yeah. For instance, is it one reason or many reasons that the efficiency is low?
Mm.
And what knowledge is needed in order to solve that? In academia, I think we should also have the right to ask these completely curiosity-driven questions.
Yes, exactly. That's also needed. Yeah.
And if 20, 30, 40 years ago, no one would have asked questions about lipid self-assembly and phase transitions and so forth, we wouldn't have had the possibility. No one, or the knowledge would not have been there to come up with how to formulate something that eventually worked. And that research was in the beginning carried out probably to understand how lipid membrane in cells functioned, because there were lipids there. But it was motivated perhaps from understanding cellular membranes, but a lot of discoveries that were of no biological relevance. They were just interesting from a physical chemistry perspective, which is also important. And I think that.
So is it more difficult to get funding for such projects? Or
yeah, maybe yes, depending a little bit on funding agency. But I think having a component of fundamental questions applied in grants that are more applied in nature is still welcome and strengthen the quality. But pure curiosity-driven science may have declined a little. But that goes a little bit up and down. It is trends that goes in both directions. And I also think that we see within big companies today that they themselves invest in quite fundamental science, Google and others, because they are aware of the importance of doing that. And I hope that will not disappear from the universities, because I think being responsible for teaching, I think it is important that the science we do have a big component of curiosity-driven research, just asking questions.
So how much, I have a strange question maybe, so how much of your time would you say you are actually curious, or how much of your day is spent being curious, or is it more of a rare component?
Yeah, I'm old enough to be honest.
Yeah. Because it sounds like such a key component. But also there are so many other things that's part of the work where you maybe don't have access to that.
No, but I think I'm a very curious person. But today I'm more curious. I feel more curious when I read about science that is not related to the research that I do. The origin of life, quantum mechanics, the theory of mind, those unsolved questions that there are so many of, that if I would have been a brave young scientist, would maybe have made an attempt to contribute to. But I'm not more curious in one or the other. I'm just curious in what is it that we don't understand. I'm also curious when it comes to our own research, of course. But I followed that for so many years that the curiosity there is part of the job. I'm adding, you don't make big steps in knowledge. You gradually build on new knowledge. And therefore, the excitement in reading new papers, it is maybe 1 or 2 papers a year where you really feel excited and feel here, this is an important contribution. This is something we need to learn from. It was much more of that previously. But curiosity, I think, is the main and another very important feeling one, if it is a feeling, mindset that one should have to enter into an academic career, if that is what one wishes. But I think curiosity overall is important, quite irrespective of what you do. And also being curious makes life more fun, right? So it's and we are equipped with a mysterious brain, and we don't know for how long we will have the fortune to carry it and use it, and I think it is just fantastic to.
So are there any other qualities that you would say are required or needed or preferred if you're entering into an academic career, in addition to curiosity?
I think I think this is a quality that will gradually become more and more important, and that is the capacity to work, not to generate a network, which we often say, but to work in networks, to collaborate. I think more and more projects will, if not being interdisciplinary, will involve larger and larger groups of scientists. I'm not 100% sure that everything will be solved with everyone becoming interdisciplinary, because we need we need to focus in on subjects, but we will have to work in fairly many scientists in the future will work in large networks. And I think a capacity not to know everything, but to communicate with many types of scientists, I think, and an interest in doing that, I think, is another thing that is important. And then also do what I did not do. I mean, I met many different scientists that work for shorter periods in many different labs. But I also think being exposed to different environments to gradually gain knowledge to build up a research question that you take responsibility for. I've been in method development, but there are many other areas, but it is easiest for me to relate to method development. And there I also think that being exposed to a lot of different methods based on different physical principles could be very helpful in. That is more an advice that gaining, but that is not new, or I think very many would agree on many things that I say. If I'm enrolled in the future in this, it would be interesting maybe to have a few different scientists in a round table discussion here, because I think it looks we are individuals, and we view this differently depending on who we are, because we always relate to ourselves, but also it is a bit field dependent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so time flies. We soon need to wrap up this conversation. I was just thinking, do you have any other advice to give to a young scientist who's considering pursuing an academic career but maybe feels it's a bit too risky? I remember you yourself, you said that the day you got your first permanent position, you were quite happy because you realized that you were going to spend the rest of your life doing something you really like. It sounds like a fantastic feeling. So, I mean, if you feel that this is something that you would like to go for, but maybe you don't really dare, is there any advice that you could give?
I think I would give this advice. So very many PhD students, they start on a PhD being a little bit uncertain. Am I going for an academic career, or will I do science or research in industry instead? And I must say that I think it is as fun at both places. You can be as intellectually stimulated. So it's not, I really don't value one higher than the other. But if you think that you want to have the freedom that there after all is a little bit more of, I think, in academia, you should give yourself that, you should make that decision early on in your PhD. And because you have nothing to lose in doing that. So even if you did make another decision at the end of your PhD to go to industry, you will be as attractive having a good thesis that was composed to make a scientific career, because industry will not ask for a paper with something applied on something of their interest. They are interested mostly in your knowledge. And then, so that is a first advice. So think if you think you have an interest, focus on a scientific question and do that with dedication and curiosity. And then gradually you will know. And then I also think the next step you take is to identify an environment for a postdoc. If you have a family, start that discussion early. You're about to be married to someone who might have to leave, so that there is an awareness of that. And then, because I also think that it can be 2 fantastic years going to another place. Maybe I'm saying that because I didn't experience that, but I think that I see that in many who are going away and then returning back, that it really was fruitful in many ways. And then after 2-3 years as a postdoc, I think you know what you want. But I think you benefit from making a decision to test early and don't wait and say, I'll see when I defend my thesis. That will increase the chances, I think.
Great. So I think we will end with that advice. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and perspectives and advice on an academic career. And to all our listeners, I want to say thank you so much for listening to this episode with me, Malin Nervardsson, and Professor Fredrik Höök, Chalmers University of Technology. And I would also like to take the opportunity to mention to those of you who are listening or watching that if you're interested in surface and interface science or related topics, you should check out our blog, the Surface Science blog. Thank you.